not know very well. Salvador, would you please come up? So we're going to wait for Salvador while he's trying to join us. No matter what happens in the world, now that we're living this terrible reality of war, of conflict, and because all of this threatens us, sometimes we know, thanks to many people, that the world is actually a good place, that we can make it a better place. So I want to thank the Salvador Association. Salvador, of course, all the people in this room, all those who are online, who continue to support the different initiatives, because it's thanks to this that we're making the world a better place. Better than really how we found it. This is what gives us motivation to continue to face these terrible wars and to look at the world from a different perspective, because peace is possible, helping others is possible. This is what we need to do on a daily basis. So I am going to start with Bruna. She is an actress. She can sit down, actually, crossing her legs, which is impressive. And I want to actually know from Bruna, I've noticed that many times she feels at home. And so I want to ask her specifically, why is the Salvador Association a second home for her? Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to speak about this, because just like a majority of people, I had very little information. When I think about my academic history, I had very little time, actually, where I remember actually socializing with people with disabilities. Of course, these people are just as apt as I am to have a normal academic path. So why is, for instance, the theater or the acting sector, how can I contribute? How can I remain more attentive? How can I be more sensitive? How can I be more inclusive, even in my personal life? And so I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy for the opportunity, actually, to share with you my personal experience. It wasn't always easy. I have mentioned this when I was actually speaking in a school. Sometimes the reality is really aggressive, and sometimes the reality is sad, and sometimes I want to help, but I don't know how. So I'm going to say this, and I believe it. Perhaps, how can I really make the world a better place? Because I'm part of this world. And so I have a civic duty to actually make the world a better place. It doesn't matter if there are laws that oblige companies to actually hire people with disabilities. If the way that we look to the person that is sitting beside us, if we look at him in any different manner, why would our physical limitations actually exclude us? Or why should we actually isolate certain people because they are physically different? So how can I really make my company attractive and inclusive so that if I have a disability, if I have an interview, for instance, because there are sites that actually hire people at a distance. So how can I be confident so that I can actually participate and be part of the team? Well, yes. Bruna is representing I think, much more than just a community. She's representing humanity. So many times she's right. There's a lack of access. And when we speak about access, it's just much more than a ramp. It's our attitude. It's our mindset. It's our heart. How can we expand horizons? I wanted to ask Ruben, and Ruben, of course, is blind. Ruben, what can you tell us about your personal experience? You're a young adult. Tell us a little about your opinion of the accessibility challenges in Portugal. And Ruben is also a musician. My great passion and what I've always fought for in terms of professionally is actually communication. My love is radio. That is the objective that I always try to reach in my academic path. But unfortunately, my country didn't allow me to be the professional that I wanted to be, that is, in communication. After knocking on many doors, after trying, after even winning an award, actually, and it didn't actually serve any purpose whatsoever in terms of employability, I opted to be a musician, to be a composer. I understood very, very quickly that I couldn't continue to knock my head against a wall. So I accepted what life was actually transmitting, and I opted to develop the musical aspects. When I finished my undergraduate degree in music, I tried to do an internship, and I actually worked at a radio station. I'm not going to mention the name. And I had a colleague back in the faculty where I had studied. And of course, I tried also to have my internship at the faculty where I had studied. And I remember that when one of the ladies from the department saw me, she became very, very nervous. And I, unfortunately, was never, ever actually even contacted by email. So I sent an email to the department, and the same answer that there was no availability, and they simply didn't have the possibility for me to do the internship at the department. So I answered that I felt that I was being actually discriminated against. And she answered that not at all. Now, I can tell you that after a week, I was beginning my internship. And I did everything that a journalist would normally do, except taping or recording, for instance, because the computer didn't have the software that I would require in order to work it. Everything else I did. So I was out in the field, etc. And then I continued my internship. And I continued to look for opportunities. Now, we can tell that with your voice. I mean, you have a radio voice. It's unbelievable, Ruben. Your voice is absolutely deserves to be heard in any radio station. Now, of course, I think excellent. You defended your own rights. You've just explained your personal experience. Of course, it has to do with sometimes actually informing people or creating awareness. And the importance of feeling free. This is something that has always impressed me in terms of Salvador, because he is someone actually that transmits this message. Cesar, tell us about your reality, please. What makes you feel that you belong? And I'm going to open a parenthesis. I have to tell you that I find the word disabled abominable. This is the word that we often hear, but everyone knows that when you're dealing with physical obstacles on a daily basis, even moral obstacles, it makes of us people that are extremely efficient. This is just a parenthesis that I wanted to open. Cesar, good afternoon, everyone. I have worked at the ADGS for 6 months. It was curious. I remember seeing an ad. They were looking specifically for someone with a disability. I had never seen this in Portugal. For a very simple reason, because they believe that somebody with disability to work at a university department would have a different vision about a particular topic, because the company wanted to actually bet on the hiring of people with disabilities. And it wasn't about quotas. It was because they believed in inclusion. So if the society has 10, 15 people with a disability, then we want to include, obviously, people with disabilities in the workplace. So my experience has been curious. Of course, I spent a very long time trying to find a job. There is always that doubt, should I communicate the fact that I have a disability? There was, of course, many companies where I would send out CVs. In some CVs, I would mention the disability. In others, I wouldn't. If I knew that I would be excluded, I wouldn't actually mention of the disability. So I remember there was a multinational company in the Porto, a city in the north of Portugal. They called me to come in and they were interested in interviewing me. But then when I did mention that I had a motor disability, the person just didn't know what to say. And so the person told me that they would speak with the person responsible for the department, and then 8 months passed and I never got an answer back. So I've had the privilege of actually being part of the Salvador Association, participating in many awareness campaigns. I have been in schools, so it's interesting because I have spent a long time trying to find a job, and now I'm on the other side, if you wish, of the equation. I'm working at an association that deals with this problem. Yeah, it's a punch in the stomach, isn't it? I mean, it just is so painful when we are met with silence. Silence is actually so tough to deal with. And I think that's really something that we have to learn, is that everybody deserves an answer. Salvador, I don't know if did you, Cesar, your disability, were you born with the disability? No. I know that with Salvador, of course, everything changed when he was a teenager. We thank Salvador for being more than the Secretary of State. He's more than a minister in this country. Salvador, at the end of these 20 years, you still have many frustrations with regards to accessibility and employability. Yes, without a doubt. It's always very positive to see all of these numbers, all of the partners that work with us. I'm very, very proud. And above all, because I work with a spectacular team, and whenever there's a problem, they find a solution. And more projects. But also, I have 20 years of this association, and of course, sometimes I do get sad because I don't see practical results in our daily life. And this is what I've also shared with several families, people with disabilities, and they don't believe. They just don't believe anymore. They don't believe in our political power. And people ask me, where do you get the energy to continue fighting? And I tell them it's because I work with people like Cesar, like Ruben, like Sandra, Manuela, Luis, people that actually, have walked this difficult path. And we do try to put many things into practice. But obviously, for us to actually transfer our ideas from paper into practice, many times, of course, it requires a team of people. I'm looking at Inês from the Santander Foundation and how they have worked very, very hard. I apologize for actually mentioning only Santander. It's just because I'm looking at Luisa. But, of course, when they open a door, when they understand really what inclusion actually is, of course it makes us feel good. Of course, our objective isn't for all companies to have everything adapted, but at least that the communication flows, that's halfway actually, so that things really bear fruits. Many times there are delays, it's bureaucratic, and that makes me sad. So there's a mixture of joy, but also it does. Sometimes you do wake up tired because things don't advance as quickly as we would like. There's a lot of bureaucracy in Portugal. Of course, there are lots of projects around accessibility. Antonio Costa, the Prime Minister, actually stated that accessibility would be a priority for this government. I know that there is a pandemic. I know that there is war, but we just don't see it in Portugal. We don't see it in practice. Unfortunately, we simply cannot have freedom in our own steps. So we need more initiatives. We need to continue to roll up our sleeves. We need to continue to create awareness, and we need more supervision, more monitoring. It's not about quotas. It's not about banner that says we are a company that believe in inclusion. That's just not enough. We need city halls to have a good accessibility plan. We need local government institutions actually to make a difference. It's very, very difficult for us to remain closed at home, and we don't want this to happen. Bruna mentioned it, that many people just don't have access. We have heard lots of examples. ONCE is a world reference since 1974. It has this reality. And Poraka Nova. These are examples, and I want to thank both of them for being present, for bringing these examples, because it's possible. It's only impossible if we don't try. So we need to try. So a hotel where obviously employees have to learn, for instance, sign language, that is absolutely amazing. Bruna is an actress, and the star system, many times to be a star, you have to be beautiful, you have to have a good voice, and sometimes, of course, there is stigma. And I wanted to ask you, Bruna, what would you do if you had to change this? Well, first of all, it's not because we don't try. Many times, we don't allow people to participate in all social spheres. I think that we all are responsible. For me, it was really, really actually sad to understand that someone who's deaf, for instance, in Portugal cannot see a series on TV or a movie. And I've mentioned a soap opera, for instance, because our market, although we have cinema and we have theater, and most people do have access to several channels, but it's sad to understand that the main theater company that receives support to work with people with disability doesn't have anyone in the team with a disability, or they're unfairly paid. They're not paid in a fair manner. So why, just because I need a wheelchair, I'm not fairly paid? I mean, it's almost arrogant, the fact, that, they've given you a space for you to actually sit with a wheelchair. You should thank them for the space that they've given you. I mean, it's revolting. Obviously, I have to be paid as fairly and justly as anyone else, because I need to have the freedom of actually building a life with dignity. So if I'm on the side of the employer, or if I'm on the side of the collaborator, then I have to say, look, I'm not going to participate because you're not paying me fairly. Unfortunately, we have a long way to go. So I think that it's what we all believe in. It's not only about inclusivity or believing in an inclusive environment. We need to value people. We need to pay them fairly, equal pay for everyone, right? Ruben? With regards to how you had to give up your dream to work in radio, do you still dream? No, I haven't really given up. What I can tell you is that I cannot be obsessed by the dream. If I have to live. So, of course, I'll continue to be proactive, but I have to explore other areas. I have spent 10 years sending CVs, going to interviews, trying to be hired by a radio station, but I can't spend my entire life actually doing this. So we that know about fighting, that know about, obviously, I know of people that spend their entire life trying to find a cure for a family member that simply doesn't exist, instead of actually providing quality of life and dignity. And I think that it is true that I have a degree in communication. This is my specialty. Journalism is my area. This is what I need to focus on for a professional career. But if the signals that I'm receiving simply do not correspond to my expectations, I simply cannot continue to have a repetitive behavior hoping to get a different result. There's also needs to be a part of me that is realistic. Music, that where I am focused today, is equally a noble manner to communicate. So it's not about giving up. It's about finding another way of reaching the same objective. If in the future I should find the privilege of actually being in the career that I dream of, then excellent. Sometimes, of course, there are challenges on the radio, where people ask, if you're ever on a, desert in the desert or on a tropical island, what would you wish for? Well, many times out of need. I've always tried, of course, to dream. Almost that fado that we have to actually, prove that we have potential, that we're able. Bruna just mentioned, for instance, how should we do something in Portugal? Many times I think we waste talent, and forgive me for saying this, but the place where we also find a lot of talent in Portugal is in the garbage or in the waste bin. All of us. The first thing that we need to do is to give people an opportunity. It's not to label them. Oh, you don't see, there's no way that you'll be able to do this. So obviously, I'm not sending a CV to be a driver of a bus, But why can't I work in a radio station, or why can't I do TV? If somebody can give me an answer. Cesar, you're in a comfortable position. You're a light or a beacon to people around you. You help people you help to train them, or you create awareness. And what Bruna has just mentioned, and Ruben and Salvador, it's about being aware. It's about reinforcing what we already know. And so I wanted to ask you, in accordance with your experience, what can we replicate in other companies? Training, awareness is fundamental. All organizations. So I don't want to toot my own horn here. But I think when they hired me, AGH actually benefited, if you wish, because it's inevitable. When in a company there are no collaborators with disabilities, all of a sudden somebody with a disability begins to work and that person is able. Of course, some employees will think, the company, so obviously this is to answer a charitable initiative, or they want positive advertising, or somebody will think, he's here because he fills a quota system, or there was a quota. Inclusion is only attainable when an organization looks at someone as being Cesar. That's inclusion. It's not Cesar in a wheelchair. It's, the company has just recruited Cesar. That's how I would define inclusion. It's when I'm being treated in an equal manner. That is fundamental. That's inclusion. And that's what I would tell companies. That's what we want to attain, that they look at people with a disability and it's just John or Peter, Mary, just like anyone else. And very, very quickly, there is a message that I wanted to transmit this afternoon. Many times organizations do want to recruit, and accessibility is fundamental. This has already happened even to me. We want to recruit someone, but that person, for instance, lives on a second floor and there's no elevator in the building. Or they cannot, for instance, hop on a train. This is a problem. And it's up to the government, it's up to city halls to resolve this, but also all of us. We need to pressure our local governments, and because that's the reality. I'm in different forums, different companies, different meetings, and they all share this problem. So we count on all of you. Salvador, he's the host, and the time, we need to respect the time that has been allotted to this particular roundtable. I think that we have a lot to think about. And, of course, I remember Van in Casa, and he didn't have any way of actually arriving. And sometimes people arrive late. It's that simple. They arrive late because they have to, for instance, phone CP to let them know that they'll need a specific access ramp to actually enter the train. And so we need to be more aware, we need to participate more, and we need to speak out at a local level, at a national level. We wish everyone well, and I hope all of the companies that are listening to us online, please, let's do more and let's do better. Thank you.
Então, dá som. Bem-vindos de volta. Espero que o pastel de Belém tenha estado bom. Agradecer desde já o patrocínio dos pastéis de Belém para vos dar este coffee break espetacular.
Welcome back. I would ask everyone, please, to return to their seats. We're going to have a special moment. We speak of employability, a quota system, employing people with disability. But is the quota law sufficient? Are companies ready to employ? Are companies truly accessible? Unfortunately, just as Salvador mentioned, as well as many of our ambassadors, we continue in Portugal to have difficulties with regards to accessibility. If we want a society that is truly inclusive, then we need to be better prepared, because a step can be a barrier. A barrier for someone that's trying to enter, for instance, a cafeteria, a restaurant, a public building. So in partnership with 78, and we're going to continue to work on this particular topic. And I would ask the first video actually to be disclosed at this time.
Exage, outra rampa à porta do escritório. Exage, acabava com os degraus do restaurante No Ramp, onde os colegas levaram o João no primeiro dia. Ainda não viram que o João é só contabilista, não faz magia.
Entre 1% e 2% de trabalhadores com deficiência, diz a lei das cotas para as empresas. Sem acessibilidade, mal empregada a lei.
Deixo o apelo.
So, again, I would ask all companies that are present in this room to look inwards at your own companies and to understand what needs to change so that we don't have examples like João, Francisco, Luís that arrive at a company but then simply are unable to enter it. This is not inclusion, and it's certainly not because we decide to employ for a week or a month that we can consider a company to be inclusive. Here's another example.
Competências profissionais deveria estar um doutoramento em escalada. É aquele degrau à entrada do escritório, são os degraus para a sala de reuniões, para a copa, para a sala do chefe, para a casa de banho. Nesta consultora, que bem podia chamar-se Infinity Steps and Company, ainda não viram que a Maria é consultora, não é alpinista?
Entre 1% e 2% de trabalhadores com deficiência, diz a lei das cotas para as empresas. Sem acessibilidade, mal empregada a lei.
A special thank you to Luís and Sandra, who are responsible for this campaign. Without accessibility, anytime you see this campaign, either on the radio or in the social networks, social media, please share, because really, when we're speaking about accessibility, companies need to become better aware of the obstacles. So let's hear now from Inês from Santander Bank, please. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Salvador for the opportunity to be here and to speak about a topic which is very important to all of us. I'm here to explain exactly what Santander is actually doing. This is a path that we all need to actually walk. All companies that are listening, contrary to what Joanna has just mentioned, we're never going to be fully prepared to receive people with disabilities. But what is important is that we have to be ready to receive them. Now, in 2009, we started to employ people with disabilities. And then I explained to several directors, obviously, the importance of doing this. And Salvador has helped us a great deal to explain the importance of hiring people that require a wheelchair to get to work, and also blind. We have certain employees who are blind. I don't know if you know, but 95% of people with disability in Portugal are actually unemployed. It is absolutely unbelievable. So obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done. I want to share with you some stories. At this very moment, we have 15 people that work at Santander that work with us. And there are 4 things that are fundamental. The first one, this has to be a mission of all collaborators of the company. We begin with the CEO and we go all the way down. Our expectations, how we need to adapt to actually work with somebody that gets to, that needs to work in a wheelchair, how we need to adapt our vision. So it's fundamental. Carla is also here with me. She's responsible for the communication department of Santander. And we were discussing, obviously, that all our area, in terms of, for instance, our facilities, many times we have to adapt specific places. For instance, we had to actually dim the lights in a room for an employee who is blind. And I think it's also very important for a company to be flexible and to be proactive and to be able to change things if need be. So people need the necessary conditions to work. It's fundamental that we adapt so that these people are welcome, not only at Santander, but in your companies. And again, it doesn't have to be a great deal. Of course, we can change people's lives, not only people's lives, but their families. Today, of course, we are quite concerned. Sometimes somebody's mentioned here that it's not all, we don't know how to react. Should we help somebody? Shouldn't we? But I have no problems asking. I can tell you last week, for instance, somebody walked in with a wheelchair and they had something in their ears, and I wanted to give them a kiss on the cheek. And I thought, wow, okay, I'll ask the person if that's all right. So I think, again, there has to be a will. People need to be prepared. And we all need to acknowledge when we're not being successful, when we need to change, when we need to adapt. And it's not about it. So the feedback has to be constant. And this is another point that I wanted to mention here. At Santander, we receive a lot of feedback from the 15 people that we have employed. One of them, for instance, was the height of the tables. So, they're trying to have coffee, something as simple as that, and the tables were too tall. So we had to actually lower them. Or sometimes it's about changing the color. So they're minor details. We all of them have mentors. Another point that I think is fundamental, there are people, for instance, that simply cannot eat by themselves. I remember that I invited Patricia to have lunch with me, and I was looking at Patricia, and she said, "Look, now you have to feed me." "What do you mean I have to feed you?" "Because I can't eat by myself." So I was so concerned about recruiting people that I had no idea that she was unable to eat on her own. And I remember this particular person that I've just mentioned, the first month, her parents were actually going to the company at lunchtime in order to help feed her at lunch. Nowadays, this is no longer needed. All collaborators pitch in, but many times there's a learning curve as well. So this is something that has to be worked on. It's about a transformation process. Inclusion, in fact, it's not charity. It's not only about the will to help. It's about changing the culture of a company. People become better human beings. It's about helping the person that works alongside us. There are people that cannot eat on their own. And, Patricia today tells me, tomorrow I'm going to have lunch with Francisco. On Thursday, I'm going to have lunch with João. All of a sudden, you feel that even the company becomes a place of greater solidarity. People they share more. They're more engaged. They're more aware. And again, the changes aren't complex. Anyone can lower a table. Anyone can paint a room a different color. It's not that difficult. So the path that must be walked is fantastic for all. And I would like to share with you as well an article that a very famous journalist wrote very recently about inclusion. And I want to quote, "No one wants only to be included." I would encourage you to read the article, because if I could write, I would write exactly the same thing. Comparing isn't easy. A comparison, obviously, is almost unfair. Sometimes it's just better for us to see ourselves in the mirror and to think, what kind of person do I want to be in the future? And I think that we need to value people. We need to value in order, and by valuing, we are validating. We have to understand people. What are their fears? There's a lot to fear on both sides of the coin. 95% of people that are blind, again, in Portugal, are unemployed. They simply cannot find a job. And many times it's because employees of companies are just scared. They don't know how to include someone who is blind in their workforce. So I think that we need to find time. We need to work with associations, just as the Salvador Association, and, of course, the importance of valuing, validating, and welcoming. I think this word, to welcome or welcoming, it is about inclusion. It's not about just, finishing a checklist, ticking off a specific item on that checklist. I remember recruiting someone for my team, Joanna. Immediately, somebody that was at the end of the room, got up and helped her to hang up her coat. It was somebody from my team. So it's about actually the commitment, I think, of an entire company. And I can assure you that everyone today feels a greater pride, of course, in the work that is being done at Santander. This is absolutely valuable. Of course, people will have difficulties. Yes. Will there be challenges? Yes. Of course, there are challenges. I have to speak many times with Salvador how to better integrate people so that it is a soft, welcoming process. And the journalist that I want to mention actually is Laurinda Alves. I didn't know that she would be here. I had no idea. It's a coincidence. Look, Laurinda, I loved your article. If I could write like you write, my goodness, welcoming someone. I think welcoming is the best word when we speak about inclusion. People need to be welcomed. People need, of course, to feel that the level of expectations are the same, that the level of difficulty can even be the same, but they need to feel welcome. They need to feel, obviously, that they can be promoted, that they have opportunities within the company that are exactly the same for any other collaborator. There's another foundation that has 40,000 employees, and half of them with disabilities. And they have hotels, they have dry cleaning companies, and they are also working with Salvador. Many of the people that work in our call center are blind. And of course, people who contact the call center have no idea. And so they'll say, are you looking at the menu? Can you see, for instance, the water damage that I'm talking about? The person that's actually answering them is blind, and yet the person that's listening on the other side of the line understands perfectly, receives the same quality, same type of answer. So it's unbelievable because we have, obviously, blind people that are capable of helping others to navigate themselves within a sight. So it's all up to us to understand that it's in our hands. We can transform the lives of these people. We can transform the lives of their families. And we can transform the lives of collaborators because we contribute to a better society. Thank you, Salvador.
Obrigada, Inês.
Thank you, Inês. Santander, in fact, is a great inspiration. And obviously, we can learn with one another. We can learn with you. And if you need help in terms of training, or if you need help in terms of accessibility, the Salvador Association remains available to help you. Always, you can count on us for anything that you may need. And finally, Catarina Oliveira, our great ambassador.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for remaining in the room. I thought that most of you would actually leave. Now, a lot of what I wanted to share has already been mentioned. I think that we have already touched upon many of the different points that I wanted to share with you in terms of the importance of awareness and as someone who's actually employed. And so they asked me to reflect on where we want to be in 10 years' time, 15 years' time. What does the future look like? And I think I'm going to begin with practical messages for your companies, because when we mention including somebody with a disability, many times companies tell me, oh, we have to include, but, somebody needs to give us practical advice. And so, first of all, the first question is, why should we hire somebody with a disability? This is the first question. And then I want to speak about accessibility. And accessibility isn't just a ramp. Everyone knows this. And then how to put all of this into practice. Inés has shared with us practical examples, but how can we actually put into practice the different types of accessibility? And then 2 examples. I just want to introduce myself very quickly. I have a project on Instagram. I started a project called Rare Species on Wheels because I'm 34 years old, and when I found myself in a wheelchair, I was 27, and then suddenly I was a rare species. So for 27 years, I walked, and I was a privileged woman. And, from 28 onwards, I found myself in a wheelchair, and I wanted to continue going out at night, to a disco. And then all of a sudden, I became a rare species where I could feel it. People would tell me, you shouldn't be here, or what are you doing here? So many times we speak of disability, and this is very interesting, the concept of disability. In accordance with the World Health Organization, 16% of all humankind has a disability. In Portugal, in accordance with the different publications that I've consulted, only 10% of the population in Portugal, only 10% of the population actually has a disability. I have to tell you here that I can test this. I don't think that this is accurate. I believe that the number is much higher, but there is still a lot of stigma associated to someone with a disability. Now, a disability, first of all, the United Nations tells us that it is a concept in evolution. And I always give the example that I have a disability. I can't walk. If you ask me to walk, I have to tell you that I can't. So my disability appears when I'm in a place that has physical barriers that prevents me from working in an equal manner. But if I'm in a place where I don't have physical barriers, I no longer have a disability. And I think that this is where we need to change in society. That if we actually eliminate certain barriers, people no longer have a certain disability. It's all about our perspective. Many times we talk about an existentialistic point of view. And so I also brought the following numbers that I want to share with you. In markets such as the United States and Pakistan, of course, we find people with disabilities, and these people are employees of companies. And many times we ask ourselves, but why are we discussing this? Why should we hire somebody with a disability? Well, obviously because we're human beings. And if we decide to recruit a human being with a disability, it's true that many times in our heads we have a lot of stigma. And we don't consider somebody with a disability as somebody that we want to be part of our team. So what studies tells us is that in truth, when we create diverse environments, then we bring talent to our team. We increase creativity, productivity, because people with disabilities many times have to think outside the box. So, for instance, these subtitles that we see in movies or TV sitcoms were actually invented for people with a disability, so that they could actually adapt to people that have difficulties with their vision. So all of us use subtitles today. And in Santander's mentioned that even its culture has evolved over time. So again, the first message that I want to transmit is that a diverse environment can bring lots of advantages to the table. This is from Forbes, where Forbes mentions that when diverse teams actually make diverse decisions, their decisions are better 87% of the time. So the more a team is diverse, the better the decision-making process. This according to Forbes. I also like this sentence. Increasing diversity does not by itself increase effectiveness. What matters is how an organization harnesses diversity and whether it's willing to reshape its power structure. Absolutely right on. So it is a long-term decision to make any company diverse. But when the core of a company changes and we're not waiting for someone with a disability to actually be hired, but when we're proactive, then at medium term, we begin to see benefits. Now, another point that I want to share with you is accessibility only a ramp? Well, there are 3 different dimensions. One of these dimensions is a physical accessibility. Yes, there are ramps, but much more than just that. There is a checklist, and you may want actually to write some of these suggestions down. And the checklist goes beyond ramps. Then the second point related with accessibility is communicational accessibility. So, for instance, a blind person doesn't see what we see. Many times we have to adapt language. And then the third and most important, yes, the ramp is important, but the way that how we interact with somebody that has a disability. So I'm also going to speak to you about interaction. Now, it's impossible for us to do this in one day. I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, and we cannot change the core of any organization in a single day. People many times tell me, oh my God, I'm sorry, it's really difficult. Times are difficult. We just don't have the time to think about this. So I think it is normal sometimes for people to have fears or for people to think, now it's just not a good time. We've all heard this over and over again. But why not reflect on the accessibility of our own companies? I'm going to, somebody showed a video here, the posture that we also have heard of collaborators in companies that, often mention, why would somebody with a disability want to work here? So let's look at our checklists that are really important when we want to change a company. Your companies or your offices, do they have, parking spaces that are, for instance, well signaled, that are clearly identified? Are there any obstacles, for instance? How are the doors of your companies? Are they heavy? Can I open them easily? Are the washrooms adapted? Have they been duly built to accommodate people with a disability? Meaning, I need a wheelchair, obviously, to get around. Can I see myself in the mirror in your company? So a washroom needs to be actually thought of, or many times, I don't know if you're aware of this, but, I consider most washrooms in Portugal for the disabled to be warehouses, because when you need to use, I beg your pardon, an adapted washroom, there's always a broom, a mop, a bucket, cleaning products. It's a warehouse more than just a washroom. Also, let's talk about the furniture. Today, I had lunch. I was in Lisbon and the table was in Porto. It was so far away. So the desks, for instance, in your offices, will I be able to use them? Can Salvador, use the desk that's in your company? Are the counters at the correct height? Or people that have difficulties with their vision, the lighting, has it been correctly adjusted? Or people that suffer from hyperstimulation, is there a room where that person can rest, where they can have their stimuli diminished, where they can relax? And accessibility, is it built in order to include people? Or has it, obviously, is it the type of accessibility where people can actually get in without a problem as long as it's on the first floor? Unfortunately, the canteen is on the second, and that's not accessible. So what really does accessible mean? Or is it, blind? Oh, yeah, everything is accessible in our company. We have the different technologies. They won't have difficulties. We have QR codes. We have all kinds of scans. Also, or my favorite, sign language. It's part of the Portuguese constitution, by the way. The fact that subtitles are always necessary, that interpreters, that companies could have, sign language interpreters during certain meetings, for instance, and that the language needs to be accessible. I know that I speak very, very quickly. I do try to speak slower, but I know that sometimes my language isn't accessible because I'm speaking so quickly. So sometimes my language needs to be more accessible. And then accessibility during the recruiting process. This is what people tell me quite often. Anyone can be part of the recruiting process. Well, can somebody who's blind actually navigate in your website? Can someone who is deaf actually communicate with you? Can someone who is deaf actually participate in a business meeting? So you don't have a banner, you don't need a banner in your website, but why not in the recruiting form actually mention, is there any specifics that need to be introduced so that we can become a more equal company? And I enjoy saying this. Have we learned anything from the pandemic? During years on end, and there are many people in wheelchairs that know this better than myself. For years, that people believed in flexible working hours. I'm a nutritionist, and I know about flexible hours and the fact that I can have a flexible schedule that allows me to actually change positions, because I cannot remain hours on end sitting in a wheelchair. I need to lie down sometimes. So why not have this type of flexibility equally in a company, so that somebody with a disability or any other collaborator can have an opportunity to actually change their position throughout the day? In truth, attitudes. Let's talk about attitudes now. Obviously, there are certain people that are bothered by people with a disability. This, obviously, many times what I find, people with a disability are treated as if they were a child. For instance, people have told me, the report was terrible, but he has a disability. So this is a way of actually treating somebody with a disability as if they were a child. Or, I feel sorry for the guy. There is a type of barrier that many times we consider somebody with a disability to be inferior. Someone, for instance, once told me that, wow, you actually speak really well with somebody with a disability. So I'm never going to be unpleasant, because in their mind, they're actually giving me a compliment. But the question is, why is someone expecting me to speak poorly just because I'm in a wheelchair? I can tell you that I also drive. No one has ever congratulated me for driving. After my 27th birthday, a professor once told me, look, congratulations, you will actually drive with your little hands. When I told the university professor that I actually had arrived by car, the professor asked me, is the car adapted? You drive with your little hands. How sweet. So that person, once again, was considering me to be inferior. So to end our checklist, and this is also very important and sometimes ignored in certain companies, because this is also accessibility, it's about safety. Have you noticed in your washrooms in your adapted washrooms if the emergency cable is actually working. You know, I've needed one and it wasn't connected to anything. The cable was actually dangling, and I thought, wow, the only place where I can fall is there, because if I fall on the other side of the washroom, I won't be able to reach it. So the cable has to actually travel the entire perimeter of the washroom. It cannot be hanging in a specific corner, because if somebody with a disability actually falls in the washroom, if they fall away from the cable, how can they call for help? It's impossible. So it has to do the entire perimeter of the washroom. Also, evacuation plans. This is also about accessibility. If I work on the 5th floor, for instance, is there a plan for me to actually leave the building? Someone once told me, look, we have one person per floor that can actually help somebody with a disability. Now, unfortunately, sometimes those people are working remotely. So if there's a fire, suddenly I'm on the 5th floor and the designated person is working at home. Well, that's good. And if I worked in your company and there is a fire, can I actually activate a mechanism so that if there's a fire, I can actually, can I touch a button with my hand? Or is there a mechanism also for people with disabilities in cases of fire? So, things to put into practice. First of all, be aware of the legislation in effect. There are lots of people with a disability, and there are many companies that are not aware of the legislation that is in effect. It's not about telling somebody, look, you cannot work here because you have a disability. Second thing, there are many associations, such as the Salvador Association, that are readily available to give advice, to give tips. They have experience. So I have seen many ramps, for instance, that simply don't work. They're too steep. So how can we adapt these ramps really to make places accessible? So try to actually receive advice from somebody that has a disability. Third point, prepare a checklist so that you may correct what needs to be changed or improved. Sometimes we want to develop very large projects that may be costly in order to hire somebody with a disability. Start simple. Start with the washroom. An adapted washroom makes a difference. Start by lowering a desk, for instance. You may even have a customer with a disability. Change your sites. All of this is very important. And then understand, I think Joanna mentioned this, that no one is ready, completely ready. You will always find somebody who is different, that has a specific need. So accessibility is always in constant evolution. I found this in Job Accommodation Network, and I liked these 2 tips. Specific forms that are clear, where an employee may request a certain adapted feature, either because they need a chair to be adapted or a desk to be adapted. A suggestion box, it can be as simple as that, or a simple form, so that there can be, obviously, a very fast way of correcting what needs to be corrected. And obviously, all of this needs to reach those responsible for specific departments. It has to get to the top of the hierarchy. It is very important that these matters, effectively, that they're on the negotiation table, that they are part of a company's options. So the board needs to communicate to all collaborators the culture of the company without fear, without barriers. And this is sometimes forgotten, even when they have collaborators with a disability, and yet they don't communicate with their own collaborators, and they outsource experts. So if you again, and perhaps you're familiar with this image, accessibility is flexibility. It's about equality, it's about equity, and it's about freedom. We need different boxes, and why not within what is possible? Let's eliminate barriers. So from now onwards, let's eliminate barriers so that we truly believe in equality. So reasonable solutions. Again, this is a study from the Jobs Accommodation Network that actually found that 75% of employers who adapted their companies got very positive feedback from their collaborators. And another example of reasonable adaptations, a dyslexic employee that had difficulties with spelling, why not have specific requirements for employees with dyslexia? Why not consider equally employees who are deaf? And so I think, without further ado, that this is not only the responsibility of one person, nor is it an objective of a single department. We all need to be engaged. And finally, this is from a company, a Brazilian company. Amongst many things, they create awareness initiatives that they share with the leaders of their company. 30% of collaborators have a disability, and the distribution center is completely adapted. And they also have something that is very, very interesting. It's almost a buddy system, since they have a lot of collaborators that are deaf. Many collaborators have learned signed language so that they can better communicate with these collaborators. So, because everybody wants to learn. And then another success case that I want to share with you, IKEA, their store in Lodz, has a personalized system for people with disability. If I arrive by car, I have several parking spaces where I may park. If somebody arrives by bus, there is a path that has been well signaled all the way up to the IKEA's front door. I'm actually going to show you a video. And if you want to arrive on your own, I can actually arrive at IKEA and then ask at the very end of the purchase for help in order for my purchase to actually be placed inside my car. Have a look at the IKEA video.
Ah, sim, e tem caixas rebaixadas também.
And as you can see, everything has been adapted in terms of height.
Ainda falta um bocadinho, mas já estou a acabar. Mas pronto, acho que é uma boa solução.
So it's a good solution. Why? Because everything is accessible. I can purchase on my own. And it is true, I have asked for help in order to place my purchase in the car, and it is available. So this snowball that I'm seeing, oh, my company isn't accessible because I don't have an employee with a disability. So we continue to have a company that doesn't have, for instance, an adapted washroom. So people with a disability aren't physically present in the company, so the company doesn't do anything. And it becomes a snowball. It becomes an avalanche. And I think that we have to start investing in accessibility, regardless of the fact whether the company actually has a collaborator with a disability. This is a phrase from the Harvard Business Magazine that says investing in a work environment that is focused in the diversity of its collaborators is not only a matter of social responsibility, it's a matter of survival. It's a matter of society as a whole, because everyone needs to become aware that when a team is diverse, results are more positive. And the last thing that I want to leave with you, we are speaking of accessibility. Accessibility is the possibility not only of entering, but being part of a project. So it's not only about, again, an employee entering into a company. It's about allowing an employee to remain within a company and to be part of it. I'll leave you with this video.
Part of the experience is being welcomed to the restaurant and enjoying the atmosphere.
Disabled people often encounter situations where there are barriers to accessibility. Sometimes venues and services attempt to address this. In this example, although it is possible for everyone to access this restaurant, the experience of the disabled person is very different. It is uncomfortable, both physically and emotionally. The building isn't technically accessible, but the experience and atmosphere are not. Just because it's accessible, it doesn't mean that it's inclusive. Just because a disabled person can visit the restaurant, it doesn't mean that they want to if the experience doesn't make them feel welcome and valued. This example helps us to understand the difference between accessibility and inclusion. Accessibility means you can. Inclusion means you want to. The opportunity is there for someone to go further. The individual feels thought about as part of the overall experience. When we're somewhere unfamiliar, we have to rely on different types of communication to navigate this setting. Communication barriers can make it difficult for people to access and interact with services, leading to frustration, confusion, and isolation. In order for communication to be accessible and inclusive, it should be clear, direct, and easy to understand. It should be available in multiple formats so all users have equity of access. Sometimes this also includes for others to have access to information. In the workplace, everybody should have equal access to information. Lack of consideration of potential barriers prevent disabled people from fully taking part. In this scenario, by not looking at the person they're addressing and talking too fast, people in the meeting are excluding their deaf colleague. This leads to for him being excluded from this opportunity since he can't read lips that quickly. All three scenarios were accessible, but they were not inclusive, leading to frustration and inequality. It's about allowing for the opportunity to be equal. What can you do in your place to make an experience inclusive and not just accessible? Thank you, everyone.
Obrigada. A Joana disse...
Joana has just said, if anyone has a question, please go ahead. Is there any question that you would like to ask me? Everyone's all right? Yes, please. Yes, you have a question. Please go ahead. I've had very difficult experiences. A company thought that inclusion for me would mean that I could only be employed as a cleaning lady. So if it involves cleaning, then they'll hire me. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing by creating awareness. I can tell you that I've had a great deal of difficulty finding a job. And I can assure you that I have also mentioned the importance of a more inclusive and diverse company. Thank you for sharing. In fact, what you've just said, I know that many people, I hear certain people telling me, yes, I'm finally employed, but I cannot have lunch with my colleagues, or I've never been promoted in the last 15 years. So you're right. Sometimes, yes, it's not easy even when you are hired. I think we all feel. I can give you an example. OSHA, that's at the Ubu shopping center. I have lots of difficulties to get a shopping cart. I have already sent them lots of emails. I have written, and there just aren't shopping carts for people with a physical disability. So, or there is a shopping cart, but it's stored in a locked room, and then I can't, I'm not allowed to access that locked room. It's just impossible for me to get a shopping cart. And all I want to do is actually do my shopping. So, something as simple, as walking into a supermarket and getting a shopping cart that has been adapted to a wheelchair is an impossible challenge. So as a customer, I have a great deal of difficulties with counters, for instance, that are too tall, and I can't communicate with the information desk because they can't even see me. And I'm speaking about the largest companies in Portugal. So I think that they need to be far more attentive because each customer has specific needs. Yes, they don't see us as customers. I can tell you as well, in Porto, I'm not going to tell you where, but many times I was with somebody, I was having coffee, and I saw, that place, and I said, okay, let's go. But they had two entrances. One of them had two steps, and the other had one. So really, if I was by myself, it was impossible. So I asked my friend to enter the coffee shop, and they said, yes, we have a ramp, but you have to use a different door, and I have to get the ramp. So when I finally got to the other door, it had a table by the door. So even if I wanted actually to enter that particular coffee shop, 4 customers would have to get up from the table that was positioned in front of the door. And so I told the manager, look, thank you. Look, this is not what is considered accessible. And it's the same thing when you're trying to enter a supermarket. You want to enter into a supermarket, but you have to fill out a form first, requesting a shopping cart that has been adapted to a wheelchair or to our height. I mean, come on. This is not accessibility. Things have to be far more simple. Yes, we also have to understand that companies need to be aware of the different difficulties that we're having. Yes, there are lots of papers that have been published, of course. On the one hand, companies that work a great deal on accessibility for their customers, but then there are no measures whatsoever for their own employees. So, that happens, for instance. We can talk about theaters. So, a spectator that has paid a ticket, they'll build a ramp for spectators or to walk in so that they can actually, pay a ticket, watch a play. But then if somebody with a disability that actually works in a theater may not have adapted counters, adapted tables, adapted ramps, etc. Yes, even in events, we need, for instance, to find an auditorium, and we want, for instance, people with a disability to actually be able to get on stage, and it's impossible. So there are many, many companies that focus their attention on what is outside and not necessarily what lies inside. And even architects, some architects need help in terms of their awareness. In terms of IKEA, I have complained actually. And it's up to all of us to complain, to write, because not all stores have that level of awareness. IKEA had a assistance program. And the assistance program, they actually charged. And I complained because I didn't feel that I should be charged for the same assistance system that they were offering in terms of placing a very large box into a vehicle, for instance. So I actually complained, and I have to say that today we are not charged. If in fact we do, if there's a bulky purchase, there's no charge whatsoever for an employee of IKEA to help us place that purchase in our car. So I think that it's also very important for us to put our complaints in writing, because if we want to change something, sometimes talking about it just isn't sufficient. And I remember with a particular client, I sent more than 5 emails. Sometimes it's, one complaint is insufficient. So, in your case, for instance, it's not enough just to verbalize our thoughts. We have to put them in writing, and we have to insist. And sometimes it's more than just 1 email. It takes 2, 3, 4, 5. We have to be persistent. So it's up to us, really, to mobilize persistently so that we can create awareness and make a difference. Thank you very much for sharing as well. I completely agree with you, Ricardo. I know that it's difficult. And that's why, in my own Instagram, I do try and create awareness. The great majority of my public does not have a disability. But sometimes I feel that my life is, a list of complaints. And you're right. Any times I purchase or when I go shopping, there's almost always somebody parked in the designated parking spot for people with disabilities. And I always request the complaints book. It's tiring. When I arrive home, it's true. I always request the online complaints book. I'm the best client. I'm their best client. I'm always complaining online. So I arrive home, and with the digital means that we have today, we can always spend time actually writing a complaint, because when we're actually, in my opinion, communicating to the coffee shop owner, or we're communicating within a supermarket, people listen, but it doesn't mean that things change. If we want things to change, we have to write them down. Yes, absolutely. Joanna has asked me to stop talking 35 times already, so thank you, everyone.
Alguém vai subir? Ai.
Fácil, que é mais fácil do que estar a subir, como já estamos poucos.
We have already talked about accessibility, inclusion, the importance of integrating, of welcoming with open arms. You know, whether it's AGH Foundation or any other examples that Ricardo has just mentioned. Salvador Association is here to help you. Ricardo, we cannot, as an association, always complain, but we do have groups that do complain in writing, and we do continue to collaborate with representatives from the government. Please allow me to thank my international guests, again, Poraka Nova, all of you that Catarina mentioned, also in Barcelona, all of our representatives and several guests. Thank you for being here. The freedom that we feel in Barcelona, Sevilla, Badajoz is completely different than what we sometimes feel in many cities in Portugal. So we have mentioned here several examples of counters, entryways, having adapted spaces, but I also want to call to your attention, and there are companies here with lots of contacts with their city halls. Please, let's work locally. I, for instance, have difficulties. I know that sometimes I can only walk into one or two restaurants, either because they don't have an adapted washroom or we can't get in the front door. So we want to feel free. We want to feel integrated. And Laurinda, I think Laurinda, you know, to speak after the most interesting, speeches ever. I just want to say the following. We all, we have to fight, this idea that somebody with a disability is inferior. Either it is unconscious or consciously. We need to stop considering people with a disability to be inferior. In the Carcavelos campus, we have a peer-to-peer program. It's a buddy system. I'm your buddy. And people today know that they can count on their buddy. And then, of course, the importance of working in a partnership or a network. I think that we have to understand that we can only achieve our goals together. And finally, what Caterina underlined. One thing is to, talk about accessibility, ramps, etc. Another thing is actually to be valued, to feel well in the workplace. And that's what we need to focus on. And, of course, Katerina, thanks again. I really need a nutritionist, Katerina. So I need your help in terms of nutrition. So, and we can do it anyway, whether you want to remain seated or lying down. I don't care. I need a nutritionist. Look, thank you, everyone. Again, diversity makes the difference. Whatever happens in the world, and the world today is a threatening place, we have spent a wonderful afternoon together. Hopefully, we all leave having learned something. So thank you, everyone, for being here, for being together.
Obrigado, Joana, também. E a toda...
Thank you, Joana. Thank you to all the members of the team. Thank you for making this event possible. Mariana, thank you. Joana as well. Joana, Mariana, thank you for organizing this event. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Let's go. Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone.